Hi, and welcome to the Boardroom Live. This is the podcast for professionals who want to build a board career, any type of boards. But today I'm here with Mary Landry, who is a retired Rear Admiral from the United States Coast Guard. And she also served in the White House. And today she serves on boards, public and private. And so we're going to be talking a little bit about public, private boards and her story. So, Mary, tell us a little bit about your early life. How did all of this get started?
Right. Well, thanks for welcoming me to this session. We talked earlier about how you want to pass the baton, bring the next generation along, and that's I look forward to the opportunity. I did not plan this work that I'm doing now. It just came along as I was exiting. Federal government, I would call it. So I was in Buffalo, New York. Grew up in Buffalo, New York. Went to college in my hometown, and then my family were military. My brothers were in the Army, and I had cousins in the Coast Guard. And I was looking for a bridging strategy to go back to law school. I was going to look for management experience, junior level management experience, and then some education benefits, 2 for $1. So I went to my cousin's graduation from the Coast Guard Academy, and he said, "Oh, you should go in the Coast Guard." And so I applied to Officer Candidate School, which is how you assess into the officer program after college. And my father was not in favor. He was pretty traditional. It was 1980, and he thought, women don't belong in the military, which was kind of funny. But it was new ground. They just started opening up the academies to women 4 years earlier, so it was new ground. And I went in thinking I would stay 3 years, and I would get out and go back to law school. And I got in, and it was very interesting, very dynamic. I was stationed in Southern California, and I really love the work and love the people, love the mission of the Coast Guard and the culture. And then I met my husband also. I was dating him. So it's like all of a sudden I sat there at the end of 3 years thinking, well, I'll stick around a little longer, and ended up staying over almost 35 years. So
Didn't you tell me your father said he wanted you to be in fashion or something? So
he said,
that career didn't
"Why
go
don't you go
anywhere
into
here.
fashion merchandising?" And I'm like, "Dad, come on." He meant well. I think he was traditional. He wasn't being
Course.
chauvinistic. He was just traditional, and he was very concerned. He had been in the Army and the Korean War, and I had siblings in the Army, and I don't think the military at that point was used to women, and I think he was just being uh, careful and protective, I guess I would say.
But
Yeah.
you had a long career, right, in
I did.
the military and the U.S. Coast Guard. Tell us about that. Tell us about some of the experiences that you had
Yeah.
there.
So interestingly, and my father eventually was so proud of the work I was doing, and it became so interesting. I ended up in a part of the Coast Guard people aren't familiar with, the regulatory side. And that's important to understand because as a young lieutenant in the Coast Guard, I was inspecting cruise ships, and I was working with the energy sector, shipping. I was chemical ships, gas ships, port security, environmental response, all the things you do in commercial shipping that are very business oriented. And working in that environment as a regulator, we had a role of keeping things safe, secure, and environmentally sound in the ports, but also facilitating commerce because the economic engine of this country is trade and goods moving. And the ports were critical to that. So I ended up by default going into this field in the Coast Guard that aligned very well with business and working with business people all those years and making sure the train, you say the trains leave on time, the planes leave on time. Well, the ships have to keep moving. They make their money. They don't make it sitting in port, getting the regulator to hold them up. They make it by turning the port or making the turn, getting the goods in, getting back out. So I worked in that for many, many years and just came up through the ranks that way. So it was a very interesting mission. And my husband was the classic ship driver, search and rescue, law enforcement, migrant interdiction, the things that people are more used to seeing the Coast Guard out in the front lines with. So it was one of those behind the scenes fascinating fields. And yeah, I stayed over 30 years. Yeah.
And so today you sit on the board of Norwegian Cruise Lines, right? Which
Exactly.
now is starting to make sense as to why you were there, right?
Yes, right. It was interesting. I get the recruiter from Heidrick and Struggles, catches me on LinkedIn and says, "I'd like to talk to you about a hospitality board." And I said, I answered back and I said, I don't know anything really about it. That's not my background, hospitality. And then once we spoke, he explained to me they have all they need in those skill sets. What they're looking for is somebody with that regulatory background, which I thought was kind of interesting because I felt like I died and went to heaven. I had wanted to go on a public board. I thought it more likely would be the energy sector because I had worked so much with the energy sector through my career. And here was a cruise ship. And I remember all the work we did with cruise ships, including pandemic preparedness. Believe it or not, we had done a pandemic exercise in Boston with a big cruise ship. It was so interesting, many years before the real pandemic hit. So it was interesting to end up, and I'm just so thrilled to be back in maritime. It's been several years now, but it was just a real gift to be able to have that opportunity.
I think it's something I hear a lot, which is people say, I thought my board career would go in a particular direction because of the skills or the experience, but actually I got tapped on the shoulder for something completely different, but it makes perfect sense, right? So this was a bit like that.
Right. I think it's very important. You make a great point, Naomi. You have to really understand where your skill sets are and where your expertise is, and make sure you're the right fit. It's not just them wanting you; it's are you the right fit for them? Are you going to bring the right things to the table? So when he said hospitality initially, I pushed back, saying I might not be the person for you, and because you really want to be honest about that. It's so critical. Boards are not they're big, they're small, and they need everybody to have a certain expertise that they bring to the table. Yeah.
So you're also on the board of USAA
Yes.
as well. So
Yes.
that's not cruise ships, right?
No,
So
no.
tell us about your fit there. Tell us about the.
Well, that was interesting. I left government to join the board of, I would have stayed a little longer in government had I not had the opportunity to interview for the board, USAA. Talk about dying and going to heaven. The USA was built and designed and created by service members who needed auto insurance because they would go overseas in war zones and insurance companies would not insure their cars. So they found a way to insure each other. They developed this corporation called USA, started in 1921, and it just kept building and building. So by the time I'm being interviewed, it's a Fortune 100 company with a huge remit in insurance, homeowners insurance, car insurance, health insurance, all sorts of insurance. And then they also have banking and they have financial services. So, and life insurance and annuities. So it's a complex, large, successful company built with a design. And what's unique about USA, why I say I died and went to heaven is talk about pride and mission. The people who work for you, the member is job one, and serving the member is job one. And so, and most members have a military affiliation. They may not have served in the military themselves, but their grandfather did, or their father did, or however they had their capability to enter the company. But it's just very purposeful work. It's pride and mission, and it's very a big, huge, complex business. And I felt really like I'm leaving government as an admiral, and by then I was a senior executive. So I was working at a very strategic level in government, and then I was able to transition to a very strategic situation in board work. Yeah.
Wonderful. And we've talked a little bit about sort of attributes and qualities and experience, but talk to us a little bit about what you think makes you or others successful on boards when it comes to style of working, attributes or characteristics.
Right. So I always have these themes, so bear with me. But the theme I think about there is collaborative. I used to say in the military, it was important to have collaborative leadership with a commanding presence, because you don't want people to follow you because of your stripes. You want people to follow you because they really believe in what you're saying. They respect your expertise, and you also want to be collaborative because you want to be able to dialogue with people, get the best out of them, get the best out of whatever you're bringing to the conversation or the discussion or the situation, and you want to leverage everybody's input. And so I call it, I think the skill I had gained from all those years of negotiating, whether it was the regulatory issues we would negotiate with companies or the situations we would find ourselves in the Coast Guard, I found it transfers very well to how you should operate in a boardroom. You are not running the company. You are sitting with a board of directors who have to have a way of getting along with each other while still giving effective challenge to that company on issues you might disagree with or think they might be headed in the wrong direction. You want to give them effective challenge. You also want to challenge your own board colleagues on things.
Mm.
These are major decisions you're making, whether it's allocation of resources or big decisions, strategic direction of a company. You want to be able to have that collaborative style of being able to have a dialogue, but also have a commanding enough presence that your view doesn't get overlooked. You if you have important input, you've got to be able to present it, and you've got to you've got to want people to respect what you bring as far as your expertise. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I think as well the what I hear you saying is that there's the respect, but you also have to stand your ground, right? If you have an opinion or you think that you need to go in a certain way, does that mimic a lot of what went on in the military when you were a leader there?
Absolutely. Well, we were talking before we sat down here about how similar any kind of job is. Whether there's leadership, there's management, there's crisis response. There's all sorts of facets. Even when my daughter played college hockey, the way her in Division One at Brown University, she played ice hockey. Her coach had certain styles of leadership and the way she tried to motivate the team. And my daughter would have discussions with me about her coach's style. And I'll just give you a little hint out there. She was called the Bobby Knight of women's hockey, which means she was kind of tough and difficult. And so we would have these great conversations about leadership, about management. And by the end of her 4 years, I will be honest, her coach was calling me and talking to me about situations she was in and getting my advice on things. So leadership and management and the way you dialogue about motivating people, getting the right results, there's a common thread. Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
And we talk a lot, and there's a lot of well, you've been through a lot of crises, right,
Yes.
in your career, not just with it, but oil spills and all kinds of things that you had to deal with, and then you actually were on both boards, right, during the pandemic, and so there was another crisis that you had to work through. So tell us, how did you deal with that, and what is some advice you can give us about that?
Right. Well, so interestingly, when I put my CP together for boards, you do the classic leadership, strategic plan thinking, this thing. I added crisis response and crisis management because I do think it's a skill set. I not only went through the pandemic and I went through 9/11 in the Port of Boston with the LNG issues and the shipping issues we had in the Port of Boston and getting things back moving. The Secretary of Transportation said, land all the planes, and we stopped the ports across the country for 4 days. So I've gone through crisis, and there are certain things you learn during those situations about how you have to manage dynamic tension. You have to pay attention to you have to set up outcomes and goals and objectives, and you have to monitor and make sure things are moving the way they should, and there aren't problems that are going to really be showstoppers or could lead to failure in whatever you're doing. And so having gone through that a few times, I call it, there's the day-to-day you do, and then there's the focusing events that pop up. So 9/11, Exxon Valdez was a huge oil spill. That was a big event in my career. Things that require national attention or international attention, and also require possible regulatory changes or changes in the way we work. You go through those, you get through them, you get through the crisis itself where there are lives at stake and there are, issues that are really of import, and you get certain themes on how you manage those. So I definitely had background in that. And when I sat through the pandemic, I mean, the cruise industry was heavily impacted. Even the work of USA had to change. People went remote. That's thousands of people going remote, heavily relying on customer service, and keeping the 24/7 connectivity that they needed. And so when you go through that in a board, even though you're not running the company, there's certain things that you bring and help that CEO and his team work through those issues. You have experience that they might not have had, and you make sure you're bringing those skill sets to the table. Yeah, as a board member.
So you've had experience on private company, public company. What do you really enjoy most about board service? Because this is obviously different from what you've done before. But you seem to be enjoying it. You seem to be enjoying the work. But tell us, what do you enjoy most about it?
I think what I enjoy most about it is it's an excuse to stay engaged because there's work, and there's these I really loved my career, and I was and they were placing bets on how long I would last not working when I retired officially. That is a frenetic pace, though. When you're in the military, it's a frenetic pace. It's 24/7. It's extremely demanding. I look back and I think, how did we do it? Because my husband and I raised 2 children while we were doing this career. But what's different about board work is it's that same stimulation intellectually and strategically, and that same engagement without the frenetic pace. It's not crazy frenetic. It's you have a little more time to think and breathe and just sit back and study things and really be thoughtful. And not that you're not thoughtful when you're working, but when you're working at the pace I was working at, you're prioritizing triaging constantly. You don't have to triage in board work. You're able to really give it the time and the effort. And so I'm thankful for that. I'm also really thankful for the board colleagues I have in the room, hugely accomplished people who've done so much. And to just sit there and have this very high level strategic discussions about various issues and to listen to what they have to say and what the experience they bring, it's like just a gift of, just a gift. Yeah.
And then you serve on some committees, right, on these
Yes.
boards. So
Mhm.
tell us about those committees. Which ones are you on?
So I started on audit at USA, and I've been on risk the whole time. I've been 10 years at USA now. And I was on I'm on tests. I was chairing tests for Norwegian technology, environment, safety, and security. It was a logical
Mhm.
fit to my skill set. But I also served on CNW, and I ended up switching to CNW on USA, switching to CNW at Norwegian, and now I chair both. And I think I brought some really good expertise and understanding of what was required on that committee and those committees, and I feel really proud to be able to chair both of them now. I'm still on tests on the other on Norwegian, and I'm still on risk at USA, but I'm off of audit, which is everybody knows audit is a slog, but it's an important slog, but it's a slog. But the C&W committee, it's very interesting. It's compensation and workforce, and it requires a certain discipline to not. There's always talk about managing dynamic tension. The company's leadership, they want to set ambitious goals. The board wants to set, we call them hairy, audacious goals. I'm going to quote one of my board colleagues. We want hairy and audacious goals. If you set the goals and objectives for the metrics that they're going to be paid by too soft, and people in board work knows this, you're going to get layups upon layups. That is not going to get the outcome you want in business. So you have this wonderful tension about what are the right goals to set, what are the right objectives. That's compensation. There's also really good forums you can engage in. I've gone to Harvard's sessions, I've gone to NACD sessions, I take advantage of Korn Ferry, various external expertise that you can go to, whether it's in class or webinar, stay up on the compensation issues that are out there. But the other thing is I want to mention is workforce, because workforce has become a strategic issue for the boards, and we're going through a huge technological transformation. So chairing C&W forces, you really need to not only pay attention to compensation for motivating, getting the business outcomes. You're answering to the shareholders of a public company, even a private company. You have fiduciary responsibility, so it's very important to keep that financial machine moving right. But the workforce piece, I would say 5, 6 years ago, was not as much a strategic issue for boards as it is now. And I'm finding this in a lot of forums I'm in with other boards. People are finding workforce is now a strategic issue for many reasons, but predominantly the changes that are going to come with having to upskill the workforce and also taking advantage of the technological revolution we're in and optimizing it. Yeah.
So you talk a lot, and when we talked before, you've talked about always learning, and I think people sort of, I think they think, well, when I get on the board, then I can relax, right? So I have to
Yes.
do a lot of work to get onto a board, but then when I get there, I can relax. I think it's probably the other way around, right? When you
Yes.
get on the board, that's when the learning starts. That's when you need to keep up with everything that's moving and changing, right? Would you
Yes.
say learning is a major piece of your role and what you do?
Absolutely, and I think that's important to think about. everybody looks at this like, oh, everybody wants a board position. They love the work and all that. The truth of the matter is, it is a lot of work. And if you're doing your job right, you take it seriously and you apply a certain rigor. There's a certain amount of work you do. There was a rule of thumb, 250 hours per board. I think everybody would agree they need to do that data analysis again. I think it's higher than that now. But more importantly, beyond that 250 or 300 or 350 hours that you're doing for that company, you have a responsibility to go outside that company's little sphere of influence and work, and look at what's going on elsewhere to make sure you're not so insular that you're just doing the work of that company. You have to pay attention to what's going on externally, whether it's in other companies that are competitors, or whether it's just in the themes. So I take it very seriously. I did a lot of work with NACD, the National Association of Corporate Directors. As I mentioned, I went to Harvard for their certification for board. I also went out to Stanford for their course. I take advantage of, PwC, KPMG. I don't want to leave anybody out. All of the big four, and all the other, whether it's search companies, Russell Reynolds, Korn Ferry, they all offer forums for board dialogue. Private directors and boards is another one. There's so many out there. Agenda has a newsletter. There's a lot of things out in the corporate governance circles, I would call it, that are really great resources. And you have a responsibility to put a certain amount of time in listening and taking advantage of those opportunities, so that you're not so insular that you're just, even your board colleagues, you have great conversation, great dialogue, you come to great decisions, but bring something in to the room besides what you're having within your company and your board. Bring something from the outside.
The boards that you're on, I mean, there's so many things going on that will impact them. I mean, geopolitical, even foreign exchange. I mean, these ships are all over the world.
That's right.
USAA is in a highly regulated industry, right?
Yes.
So you almost have to be really just reading up on everything that's impacting businesses in general, right? It's not just the boards that you're on, but just in general.
Right. I think that's such a great point, Naomi. And I think it's not just what's happening now. Trying to anticipate what's coming is so important. Whether it's, you don't want to spend so much time on a regulation that might not happen. But let me give you some examples. I always listen to Davos interviews. I think Davos is a great forum. I listen to CNBC interviews. There's different places you can get information, but I always like Davos because you get leading edge what's going on in business, but you always get these discussions. And so we had the bankers. We had Jamie Dimon. We had Brian Moynihan. We had all the lead bankers, and we had Goldman Sachs, Solomon. They were all talking about this cost, the impact on the American people and all this. And they were talking about this particular administration's interest in possibly capping a credit card rate, or possibly looking at not allowing private companies to buy homes, and all these things they're trying to do to make things more affordable for the American people. And this is a global forum, Davos, and this is not just the U.S. And so you're listening to this, and you're listening to the impact our issues have on other countries, and you think about, okay, what's going to possibly come from this? What's got sticking power? What's really going to happen? And you have to have that antenna out there, looking at the leading edge issues, simultaneous with addressing the issues that are here, the regulatory changes or the policy changes, or things that are definitely going to impact your business. So always keep your ear to the ground. Always pay attention to things that you might not even have thought were going to be in your wheelhouse, and all of a sudden they are in your wheelhouse. They impact you. Yeah.
Is there anything that you think boards need to be concerned about in the next, let's say, couple of years? Is there anything that's on the minds of board directors, public or private companies, that maybe is a little bit top of mind right now?
Well, I think geopolitical risk. I mean, when you look at what happened in Israel and the follow-on from that, we have an international company with ships sailing around the world. We have a wonderful security team with Norwegian, and they saw what was happening in Israel, and they repositioned the ships right away, and they got people out of harm's way. So the companies themselves on the day-to-day will with. I'll give you an example for USA, the wildfires in last January. We have people that go out and respond to those crises. So companies know how to do that kind of day-to-day. And I think what's important for us is to be ready to support them in that. So I gave geopolitical as an example, but then I also showed you natural disaster, and I showed you there's many things that pop up that you have to be ready for understanding the impact it's going to have on your business. And so the risk for watching, call it climate, call it whatever you want. And depending on what boards you sit on, I think that natural disasters is something I watch on the one board, and the affordability issues of insurance and things like that. And then the other one is the geopolitical risks that come from the world is really interesting right now. And it's not just what happened in Israel, that one incident. It's how tariffs, global trade, how does that impact the economy? That's going to go back to a company that deals with financial services. So there's lots of ways. And the biggest risks, I think, right now that people are talking about are, besides geopolitical and climate, are also the technology risks and cyber. And that's been around for a while, the cyber piece has, but the advancement and the pace of technological change with things that can come, they're wonderful things that can come from medicine and all that. We can solve a lot of things with some of the technologies that are coming. However, there's a risk associated with it from an ethics standpoint, from a security standpoint, from a privacy standpoint. And I think we're seeing countries and the US try to address those, whether it's through regulatory or policy changes. Yeah.
And I think it's interesting. USAA is a private company, right?
Yes.
It's not publicly traded, and then Norwegian is public. But there seem to be a lot of similarities, especially in a highly regulated industry. Do you see a big difference between the two boards that you serve on? What are the differences between those two?
It's interesting. Good governance is good governance.
Mm-hmm.
And I sit on nonprofits too. And it doesn't matter if it's a nonprofit, a private, or a public. Good governance is good governance, proper ethical behavior, proper standards of privacy. Those relate to any company you're on. And I think we used to talk in forums about the convergence. Publicly traded, obviously you answer to the shareholders. But if you look at a private company, you have a fiduciary responsibility. You have members, you're still answering to our members, our shareholders, if you will. On a nonprofit, you're still answering to whoever they're serving. So I think there's an element of accountability that's common across all three. There's certain standards of ethics, proper behavior, integrity, the things that you want your business to be everybody's trusted business. You want them to trust you that you're going to give them whatever they're providing you for a service. And so I think there's elements that are common. Those all go back to culture. Those all harken to the culture, the corporate culture. So good governance and a strong, high ethical, appropriate team corporate culture are important. So it doesn't matter if you're public or private. The only difference I'll say is you have a little more latitude in a privately held company, depending on where your support's coming from. You have a little more latitude in not having to respond or react to the day-to-day or the quarterlies or the whatever. And you have a little more freedom with that. You still have the same responsibilities, but there's a little more freedom that comes with that. Yeah.
Let's talk just a second about cybersecurity. I think I mentioned we had JC Vega in here before, who's also military background, who's in cybersecurity. And we talked a lot about some of the risks associated with it. Do you think that it's the responsibility of the board, or do you think it's the responsibility of the company to sort of protect and to mitigate that risk? Where do you think the line is drawn there between the two groups?
It's both because, and the reason I say that, the day-to-day and the tackling and blocking, that is the company's responsibility. But it's absolutely the board's responsibility to be aware that we've got the necessary blocking and tackling, the necessary protections, the best of the company's crown jewels. The reason I say it's a board responsibility is because if something goes wrong, it's very serious. So whether even culture's tone at the top, cyber is it starts with the board. And you don't run the day-to-day cyber, but you better understand where you're applying your resources, where you're looking at the strategic decisions you're making about your capital investments and things that are very serious. You've got a responsibility for that. And interestingly, now with agentic AI and all the things that are coming with quantum, we're going to have a continued responsibility in that realm of technology. So cyber's still there. I mean, that's the what do you call it?
The threat,
The
right?
threat.
It's a
Well,
bit of a
it's the operational. It's the orbit in which we all operate. So it's there.
we have to get used to it, right?
We have to get used to it. It's yeah, and I think it's there's great opportunities with this technologies that are coming, but I think there's also risks that have to be managed from the board on down. Yeah. Yeah.
So earlier you said that these two boards that you serve on, you just said it was like a dream come true, right? These are just wonderful boards that you sit on. Do you have any plans to be on more boards? What's up ahead for you?
So my responsibility now, the commitment I made. So I didn't think about board work until a colleague of mine. I went to Harvard Fellowship, and a colleague of mine from the Air Force who had already transitioned to board work reached out to me and said, you should consider board service when you leave government." And the only ask she had of me, and there was another woman that was helping me when I first was transitioning to board work, is they said, just pass the baton and bring the next generation along. So I am 10 years in to this work. I'm almost 70 years old. And I feel like, I mean, I wouldn't turn down a board if it was if I could bring something to the table. I wouldn't turn down a board, but I'm really focused a lot on bringing the next generation along. Succession planning, which is part of our work as a board. I do it on a personal level. I mentor people and talk to them about board service and what might be the questions they have to ask themselves about, what's my right fit? What's my right remit? Nonprofit versus publicly traded versus private, what's the right fit for me? So I spend a lot of time just bringing the next generation along. That's where I'm focused outside of my board work. Yeah.
Right. No,
Yeah.
and that's wonderful. And I do a lot of that work too. So
Yeah,
I really enjoy it.
It's
Yeah.
purposeful, right?
It is.
Yeah.
It is
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think when you've been through it, right? When you've
Yes.
seen it, but you were approached for both of those boards, is that right? They sort of found you.
Well,
How
it
did
was
that
interesting.
happen?
They were two different circumstances. So let's give them some good mechanics on this. Get your LinkedIn, keep your LinkedIn up to date, because the Heidrick and Struggles for Norwegian found me on LinkedIn. Ironically, somebody else, the CFO of that company at the time, had done a panel with me. We were both women raising kids with high powered careers, and we did a panel for women in the military and in the cruise industry, maritime industry in general, maritime. And we did a panel together about how you manage and balance your personal life with your professional life. We probably did it. It was 10 years before I joined this board, but she remembered that session and said, you ought to look at Mary Landry. So that was a two-prong, came in through the professional circuit through LinkedIn, but also somebody in the company knew me. With USAA, they had a search firm, professional search going, and I was still in government. So the search firm didn't look at me because I was still in government. Somebody else came to me and said, you're not on the list, but I think you should be interviewed. And would you be willing to leave government to take this role, because you can't be in government and be on a board? And I said, for that company, because I love that company and the mission, I would consider leaving government. So I interviewed. I was brought in as an additional candidate to the slate, and I interviewed and I received that board position. So it was two different situations. I used Battlefield to Boardroom was the course that military members take from National Association of Corporate Directors that orients you to corporate governance. I coach my peers, my military leader peers, who call me and say, well, how did you do this transition? I recommend that course to them for sure. It's a very nominal price, and it's worth it because it really helps you understand the transition, understand the requirements, and get yourself ready and in that mindset to present yourself. And then I mentioned LinkedIn, and there's a few other resources that I use. Board Prospects is another one. It's a website. You pay a nominal fee to belong. So you put yourself out there in a few places, and it's you got to work at it. It's not going to just fall in your lap. It's a lot of from a lot of different directions. It's personal connections, it's professional connections, and it's also positioning yourself in the right places and doing your own search and understanding for what you need to do to be prepared. Yeah.
And it was the visibility too, right? You think back to what it
Yes.
was, and you just sort of sat on a panel, right? And did
Well,
it.
that was so ironic. I
thinking, how
wasn't
did they
doing it
know?
thinking I'm going to get on a
Right.
board someday from
Right.
this. I was doing it to help the generation of women who were trying to juggle career and family. We were doing it from the right place. I think when you come into board service and when you mentor for the next generation, you have to speak from the right place of what what you bring to the table, not what's in it for you, what you bring to it. You've got to, this is a job,
Mm,
and you
mm,
have to contribute and make you have to be, you want to feel good about what you do and what you
mm,
contribute, and you feel like you're worth it and you're
mm.
adding value. Yeah.
You talked a little bit about the interviews. You said there were a few interviews. What was the process like, the interview process for either board? You don't have to tell us which one, but was there
Yeah.
anything interesting that occurred?
Uh, no, they were very similar. I think if you're if you're I had done a lot of interviews in the military. I was a pretty senior leader, and I had done a lot of interviews of people, and I had also sat on promotion boards and in the military. So I knew how we chose for succession planning. I knew how we filled that pyramid of officer core. And so when you understand the criteria and all that, you're kind of ready for it. I also, asked advice from people who had already gone through it themselves. So I don't think there were any surprises other than be yourself, be honest, be truthful, and be transparent. If you don't feel you fit a certain way, be honest about that, and they'll tell you why they're seeking you out. Have a good dialogue because you want to make sure you're the right fit. So, I interviewed in person for some people with pandemic interviewed by Zoom, but I interviewed in person for, and now I've done interviews on the board for executives they brought in, and I've interviewed other board members coming in. So there's a certain structure to it, but there's also a certain amount of you have to have a natural conversation, a dialogue, transparency, and be honest because you don't want to you just want to be honest about what you're bringing and let them see you for who you are so that they know what they're getting. They're pretty good at teasing it out. They're pretty good at asking the questions that tease out what they're looking for in a board member. But you got to be ready to just answer it honestly, truthfully. And if you're not chosen, accept that you're not the right fit. I had one board I walked out of. I did interview for a board that I didn't get on, but I walked out of that room, and after all the analysis did and all the studies I did, I walked out thinking I am not the right person for that board. They should be picking this person with this background. And they did, which was good. So you can kind of see it sometimes. You can kind of see the formula of what they need when you do the research. And then you just, honestly say, I told the recruiter that brought me into the interview, I am not the right fit after that interview. They need this. And I was honest with her about it. And it was great. I was very happy for the company that they picked the person they did.
And you were spot on. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So when you're interviewing people, how do you check for fit? Talked a lot about fit. How do you check for that? How do you test for that?
Well, luckily we have usually a couple people interviewing, and we try to bounce off each other. But you're really looking for the right personality, the right. You can tell a type A person that's going to go into level of detail that is not going to work in a boardroom, because we talked about nose in, fingers out. You really have to stay at a high level unless you're asked for expertise to bring you in to a very specific part of the business. You might be asked to help them with that. But the most part, you're supposed to stay at a very strategic level. When you interview somebody and they go down rabbit holes about their expertise, you're thinking, you are not ready to leave that business. You need to stay in the field and keep working the business details because you're going way too deep on that. So you look for tendencies that people have and see if those tendencies are something that's going to stand in the way of them being an effective board member. And it usually kind of stands out. Yeah.
No, I'm sure. I'm sure. Well, I don't know if there's anything else that we should learn about, or anything else that would be good to discuss. I know there's a few people who are online. I don't see any questions popping up, but
Okay.
maybe people are a little bit shy.
I think that element of, if you've written a CV and you've put your resume together and everything, bounce it off a few people who've been around the block a few times, because I do think sometimes things that they might think are really good to have in there might be too much or not current. I remember somebody put something in and I said, well, that's a little bit, that's about 5 years ago. It's not as important now. Focus on the things that are leading issues and emerging issues going forward. And then, I just think presenting yourself on paper first, that's how you get in the door sometimes, and then build those relationships, those collegial professional reps. Don't hesitate in a forum to say, would you mind mentoring me? The person will say, I don't have the bandwidth, or I might not be the right person to mentor you, but go ahead and ask the question, ask for help, be honest about it, and be forthright about what you're looking for, because I think that helps the person on the other end not waste your time, and you're not wasting their time.
Right.
That's really important. Yeah.
No, I think so. And I think you're doing an amazing job just working with people, right, and mentoring people and helping, like you said, the next generation of boardroom leaders. So, well, Mary, thank you so much for joining me.
you.
This has been wonderful, and I've learned a lot. And so thank you for your service, and thank you for your board service as well, for serving on boards. We really appreciate it. But thank you. That's it for now. Thank you for joining the Boardroom Company Live. We'll see you again soon. Thank you, Mary. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay.